What does a woman who had everything feel when waking up every day between four concrete walls? How much can the body of someone who accumulated $300,000 bags endure when now she can't even choose what to eat? At what moment does the silence of a cell become more deafening than the screams of millions of Venezuelans asking for food while she tried on $5,000 shoes? How many nights of crying does it take for someone like Cilia Flores to understand that the suffering she caused now pursues her in every second of her existence? Can a woman who ignored an entire country's pain bear her own pain when it finally arrives with no possible escape? Today, you're going to learn about the most brutal fall that a woman of power has experienced in Latin America's recent history. And I warn you that what you're about to discover won't provoke pity. It will provoke something much more visceral, something that dangerously resembles the satisfaction of seeing how life itself collects each of its debts. There is pain that is deserved. There is suffering that is direct consequence of decisions you made. And there is a special type of agony reserved exclusively for those who built luxury empires on mountains of corpses. Cilia Flores is discovering that type of pain. Every second, every minute, every interminable hour in her cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. This is not a story about a common prisoner. This is the documented testimony of how a woman who lived like an empress now survives as the most despised inmate in the entire federal prison system. This is the inventory of the collapse, the complete list of each humiliation, each crisis, each moment of desperation that Cilia Flores experiences while the world she destroyed watches without compassion. I'm going to reveal to you 5 truths about the hell Cilia Flores is living at this precise moment. First, the physical wounds she carries on her body since the capture, and that prison doctors barely attend to with the minimum necessary. Rib fractures that hurt every time she breathes, skull contusions that generate constant migraines, injuries that in Venezuela she would have treated with the best specialists, while Venezuelan mothers watch their children die from lack of basic painkillers. Second, the total isolation to which she's subjected, 23 hours daily in a 6-square-meter cell, without contact with Maduro, although he's in the same building, without privileges, without visits, without calls, completely alone with her thoughts and the crushing weight of everything she did. Third, the clinical depression that, according to leaked medical reports, is already consuming her. Crying episodes that last hours, panic attacks in the middle of the night, food refusal, progressive mental deterioration that prison psychiatrists document but don't treat because she's simply another inmate. Fourth, the daily humiliations experienced by a woman who believed herself untouchable, eating on plastic trays the same processed food as all inmates, showering in common spaces under supervision, wearing the same orange uniform day after day, receiving orders from guards who don't know or care who she was. And fifth, the most devastating revelation of all, testimonies from her own prison companions who describe a completely broken woman, who talks to herself at night calling her children, who cries when she thinks no one hears her, who is living exactly the type of emotional destruction that millions of Venezuelans lived because of her. I'm going to let you know when I reach each of these revelations. If you leave before the end, you miss the 5th one. And the 5th is the one that will make you understand that Cilia Flores isn't suffering by accident. She's suffering because every gram of pain she feels now is 1 gram less of the pain she inflicted on millions for years. Subscribe if you want to know how the powerful fall when power vanishes, because this story has leaked medical documents, has testimonies from prison guards, has audio recordings of her nighttime crises, and has something Cilia Flores never imagined the world would witness: the complete collapse of a woman who believed she was above consequences. Let's begin. On January 3rd, 2026, at 2:17 in the morning, Cilia Flores was forcibly removed from the Fuerte Tiuna bunker. She didn't walk with dignity. She didn't maintain composure. She screamed, she struggled, she resisted with animal desperation while Delta Force agents dragged her outside. During the struggle, she hit her head against a steel door frame. Blood flowed immediately. The agents didn't stop. They kept moving her. She kept screaming. She kept bleeding. And in that precise moment, while blood ran down her face and handcuffs cut her wrists, Cilia Flores experienced for the first time in decades something millions of Venezuelans knew very well: the absolute helplessness of not being able to control your own life. According to medical reports from the US Department of Justice that were leaked to the press, Cilia Flores arrived at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn with multiple injuries. Fracture of 2 ribs on the right side from struggling during capture. Severe skull contusion that required 5 stitches on the forehead. Hematomas on both wrists from handcuffs. Sprain in the left ankle. Minor cuts on hands and arms. Dangerously elevated blood pressure. Evident signs of traumatic shock. They attended to her in the prison infirmary, not in a private hospital, not with specialists, not with cutting-edge technology. They attended to her in a 5-square-meter room with basic equipment, an on-duty doctor who had worked all night, and a nurse who didn't have time for niceties. They cleaned her wounds with alcohol. They stitched her forehead without topical anesthesia, because protocol doesn't include it for minor injuries. She screamed in pain. No one stopped. They bandaged her ribs. They gave her generic ibuprofen for pain, and they sent her directly to her cell. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the mothers Cilia Flores ignored for years gave birth in hospitals without epidural anesthesia, without local anesthesia, without anything. Just the pure, raw pain of childbirth, while overwhelmed nurses did what they could with the little they had. Cilia Flores screamed over 5 stitches without topical anesthesia. Venezuelan women gave birth with nothing. They gave birth in hallways. They gave birth on dirty floors because there were no beds available. They gave birth while their babies died in their arms because there were no functioning incubators. And Cilia Flores, while those mothers suffered the unimaginable, was in Paris choosing between diamond necklaces that cost $500,000. Do you see the contrast? Do you feel it? Do you understand why her current pain doesn't generate compassion, but a dark and deep satisfaction? The first 3 days in prison were devastating for Cilia. According to testimonies from prison guards who spoke anonymously with journalists, Cilia didn't eat for 72 hours. She rejected the trays. She refused to drink water. She remained lying on the steel cot, staring at the ceiling. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stared at emptiness with an expression guards described as completely lost. On the 4th day, she had her first panic attack. She began hyperventilating at 3 in the morning. She screamed that she couldn't breathe, that she was dying, that she needed a doctor immediately. Guards arrived. They evaluated the situation. They determined there was no real medical emergency. It was an anxiety attack. They told her to breathe slowly. They gave her a glass of water, and they left. Cilia remained alone in her cell, crying, trembling, facing for the first time the crushing reality that no one would come to rescue her. No one would treat her as special. No one would give her privileges. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, millions of people faced anxiety attacks provoked by hunger, by the desperation of not having anything to feed their children, by the anguish of watching everything they had built crumble. Fathers who spent entire nights awake calculating if they had enough food for the next day. Mothers who divided one arepa into 4 pieces so each child would have at least a bite. Children who cried from hunger while their parents cried from helplessness. No one attended to them. No one gave them water. No one told them everything would be okay. And Cilia Flores, the woman who could have helped, was busy buying her Hermes bag number 60 while they collapsed. Cilia Flores' cell measures exactly 6 square meters, 2 meters wide by 3 meters long. It has a steel cot bolted to the wall with a 1.5-inch thick mattress. It has a stainless steel toilet without a seat that's 1 meter from the bed. It has a small sink that constantly drips. It has a fluorescent light on the ceiling that never completely turns off. And it has 4 concrete walls painted institutional beige with moisture stains and marks from years of use. There are no windows. There's no view outside. There's no way to know if it's day or night except for the institutional clock that marks prison routines. There's no privacy. A security camera records every second of her existence, every movement, every moment of weakness, every nighttime crisis. Everything documented, everything monitored, everything exposed. Cilia Flores spent decades living in palaces, in mansions with rooms the size of complete apartments, with walk-in closets larger than her current cell, with Italian marble bathrooms where the toilet cost $10,000, with views of gardens designed by international landscapers, with absolute privacy protected by armed guards and 3-meter walls. Now she lives in 6 square meters, with a steel toilet 1 meter from where she sleeps, with constant smell of industrial disinfectant and humidity, with endless sound of metal doors closing and opening, with screams from other inmates that echo through hallways all night, with lights that never completely turn off and that keep her in a perpetual state of semi-wakefulness. Venezuelans who fled the country walking for weeks slept in the streets, in parks, in bus stations, under bridges, wherever, without roof, without protection. Entire families sleeping on the ground with their small children in their arms praying for dawn so they could keep walking. Elderly sleeping on plaza benches because their bodies could no longer withstand continuing. Pregnant women sleeping on cold ground while their babies moved in their hungry bellies. Cilia Flores had 17 properties distributed in 6 countries, mansions she never inhabited, apartments she bought just because she could, villas she used twice in her entire life. Now she has 6 square meters, and every centimeter of those 6 square meters is a living sentence. According to leaked medical documents from the prison system, Cilia Flores was officially diagnosed with major depression on January 15, 2026, 12 days after her capture. The diagnosis was made by a prison psychiatrist during a routine evaluation done to all inmates considered high profile. Documented symptoms include uncontrollable crying that lasts hours, total loss of appetite, severe insomnia, dissociation episodes where she loses contact with reality, recurring intrusive thoughts, and persistent denial of her situation. The psychiatrist recommended treatment with antidepressants and therapy sessions twice weekly. Cilia rejected both. She refused to take medications. She refused to talk with the therapist. She said verbatim, according to medical records, "I'm not crazy. I don't need any of this. This is a mistake. I'm going to get out of here soon." But she's not getting out soon. And she knows it. Deep in her destroyed mind, Cilia Flores knows she's never getting out, that she's going to die in prison, that she's going to spend the next decades in that 6 square meter cell until her body simply gives up, and that certainty is killing her from the inside. Prison nurses report that Cilia cries during the night. Silent crying at first, trying to hide it. But later, when darkness and silence become unbearable, she cries openly. She calls her children. She calls Maduro. She begs aloud for someone to come get her. She says this can't be happening, that she did nothing wrong, that she was just following orders, that everyone did it, that why is she here and others aren't? A prison guard who works the night shift described in an anonymous interview what she hears. "It's heartbreaking, but you can't feel sorry. You know who she is. You know what she did. You hear her cry and scream and beg, but then you remember the photos of malnourished Venezuelan children. You remember the stories of mothers who lost their babies because there were no incubators. You remember the videos of people eating from garbage. And then Cilia Flores' crying no longer sounds like suffering. It sounds like justice. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, millions of mothers cried exactly like that, in the darkness of night, alone, desperate, calling names that would no longer respond. Mothers who lost children to malnutrition. Mothers who watched their babies die in hospitals without electricity. Mothers who had to choose which of their children would eat that day because there wasn't enough for everyone. Begging for help that never came. Asking God to give them strength to continue one more day. And Cilia Flores, the woman who could have stopped that suffering, was trying on $500,000 diamond necklaces in front of full-wall mirrors. Cilia Flores is completely isolated. She doesn't see Maduro, although he's in the same prison building. She doesn't receive visits because she hasn't yet been authorized for the visitation program. She can't make phone calls except the 2 15-minute weekly calls allowed by regulations, and those calls are monitored and recorded. She doesn't have internet access. She doesn't have television in her cell. She doesn't have radio. She doesn't have books except those she requests from the prison library, and that take weeks to arrive. She spends 23 hours a day in her cell. She only goes out 1 hour to the yard, a 30-square-meter space surrounded by concrete walls where she can walk in circles under constant surveillance by armed guards. She can't talk with other inmates during that time. She can't exercise on equipment because there is no equipment. She can only walk, or stay still, for 60 minutes, and then return to her cell for another 23 hours. Isolation is destroying her mind. Human beings aren't designed for extreme solitude. We need contact, conversation, interaction. Cilia Flores has none of that. She talks to herself. She maintains imaginary conversations with people who aren't there. Guards hear her arguing with Maduro, yelling at him that this is his fault, that he dragged her into this, that she only followed him because she was his wife. Other times she talks to her children. She tells them she's sorry, that she didn't want this to happen, that soon they'll be together again. But her children are in Venezuela, or in exile, or hiding. No one knows exactly where, and none have tried to contact her. None have asked to visit her. They're as far from her as she was from the millions of Venezuelans who suffered while she accumulated bags. An inmate who was temporarily in a cell near Cilia's before being transferred shared her testimony with journalists. She said, "I heard her talking to herself every night. She said things like, 'This shouldn't be happening to me,' or 'I only signed what they put in front of me.' She constantly justified herself to no one. It was disturbing. She didn't seem like a woman of power. She seemed like a completely broken woman who didn't understand how she had ended up there. But she does know how she ended up there. Deep in her denial, Cilia Flores knows exactly what decisions led her to that cell. She knows how many times she signed documents authorizing the looting of the country. She knows how many times she gave orders to silence opponents. She knows how many times she saw the Venezuelan people suffering and chose to buy another bag instead of doing something about it. She knows how many meetings she had with drug traffickers where they divided territories and profits. She knows how many times she used her influence to protect criminals. She knows how many times she ordered arbitrary detentions of innocent people. She knows everything, and that knowledge haunts her every second of every day. Knowledge of her own guilt is consuming her, and there's no escape. There's no way to flee from your own thoughts when you're locked 23 hours a day in 6 square meters with nothing to do except think. Food in prison is another daily torment for Cilia Flores, a woman who dined on imported lobster and drank $1,000 champagne per bottle, now eats exactly the same as the rest of the inmates. Breakfast at 6 in the morning. Instant oatmeal or cheap cereal with skim milk. A piece of fruit, usually a small apple or orange. Watered down black coffee. All served on a plastic tray that slides through a slot in her cell door. Lunch at 11:30. Processed meat sandwich or some institutional stew made with ingredients costing pennies per portion. Boiled vegetables without flavor. Industrial white bread. Reconstituted powdered juice. The same plastic tray. The same door slot. Dinner at 5 in the afternoon. Processed chicken or some ground meat variant with rice or pasta. More boiled vegetables. More white bread. More powdered juice. And then nothing more until next day's breakfast. 13 hours without eating. Cilia Flores frequently rejects food. Guards report she returns trays almost untouched. She has lost more than 15 kilos since her capture. Her prison clothes hang loose. She has deep dark circles, pale skin. Hair that she previously kept perfectly dyed and styled by private stylists who charged hundreds of dollars per session is now gray and unkempt. She looks 20 years older than 2 months ago. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, millions of people lost 30, 40, 50 kilos from forced malnutrition. Not because they rejected food, because there was no food to reject. They ate 1 meal a day if they were lucky. They drank sugar water to trick their stomachs. They ate boiled plantain peels. They ate rotten yucca they found in garbage. They watched their children get thin until they could count every rib through skin. They watched their elderly die slowly of hunger because they gave the little available food to children. Entire families sharing a single arepa among 6 people. And Cilia Flores, the woman who could have used even a fraction of the $12 million she had in bags to buy food, was busy trying on $50,000 Chanel haute couture dresses. Daily humiliations are constant and systematic. Cilia Flores doesn't receive special treatment. She's inmate number 47832-054. A number, nothing more. Guards don't call her Mrs. Flores or First Lady or any title. They call her by her last name, or by her number, or simply inmate. Every morning she must make her bed according to military standards. Sheets stretched without wrinkles. Blanket folded exactly in the prescribed form. If she doesn't do it correctly, she loses privileges. She must keep her cell clean. She must sweep the floor. She must clean the toilet. She must scrub the sink. With her own hands. Without gloves. Without professional cleaning products. Only with what they provide. An old mop, a hard brush, and cheap industrial disinfectant. Cilia Flores, the woman who had domestic employees who cleaned 500 square meter mansions, now cleans a steel toilet with her own hands. And if she doesn't do it, they sanction her. They take away privileges. They report her. They mark her as a problematic inmate. Showers are perhaps the most brutal humiliation. There are no private showers in her section. She must shower in a common area with other inmates, under guard supervision, with limited time. 5 minutes. Water that's barely warm. Institutional soap that dries skin. Generic shampoo that smells like chemicals. No conditioner, no creams. Nothing. Cilia Flores, who bathed in Italian marble bathtubs with bath salts imported from France, who used $300 shampoos and $500 body creams, now showers in 5 minutes with products that cost $1. In front of other inmates, in front of guards, without privacy, without dignity. A former inmate who briefly coincided with Cilia described the scene. I saw her showering one day. She tried to cover herself. She tried to turn so no one would see her. But there's no way to hide. You're there, naked, with 10 other women. and she clearly had never experienced that. She looked terrified, humiliated, like she wanted to disappear. Meanwhile, Venezuelan women who fled the country showered in public bathrooms, at service stations, in shelters, wherever, without privacy either, without luxury products either, showering with cold water because there was no other option, using the same cheap soap Cilia now uses, but with something Cilia never had: dignity, because they didn't choose that situation. They were forced to live it by decisions Cilia Flores made. Cilia Flores did choose hers. Every day for years. The prison uniform is another source of psychological torment. Cilia Flores must wear exactly the same as all inmates. Institutional orange pants, institutional orange shirt, black unmarked shoes, basic white underwear, no jewelry, no makeup. Nothing that distinguishes her or makes her feel special. The woman who had more than 150 designer dresses, who spent 60,000 euros on a Paris shopping afternoon, who never wore the same clothes twice if she could avoid it, now wears the same thing every day. The same orange uniform that thousands of inmates before her have worn, washed in the same industrial washers, dried in the same dryers, folded the same way. She can't choose what to wear. She can't say she prefers blue instead of orange. She can't request different sizes. They give her what they give her, and if it doesn't fit well, too bad. Wear it anyway. Shoes are particularly hurtful. Institutional black rubber shoes, without arch support, without cushioning. Shoes that after walking 1 hour cause blisters. Cilia Flores had more than 300 pairs of designer shoes. Christian Louboutin, Manolo Blahnik, Jimmy Choo. Shoes that cost $5,000 per pair. Shoes she wore once and kept as collection pieces. Now she has 1 pair of black, rubber shoes. And when they wear out, they'll give her another pair exactly the same. And so on until she dies. Venezuelan women who walked hundreds of kilometers fleeing the country did so in broken sandals, with shoes that fell apart with each step, with bleeding feet because there was no way to buy new footwear. Women who walked barefoot when their shoes finally completely destroyed. Mothers who carried their children in arms while their feet filled with blisters and open wounds. Elderly women who walked in constant pain because their old shoes gave no more. They carried their children. They carried the little they could save. And they walked until feet simply no longer responded. Cilia Flores complains about institutional shoes after walking 60 minutes in the yard. Do you see the difference? Cellmates are another element of her torment. Although Cilia is in preventive isolation for security reasons, eventually they'll integrate her into general population. She'll share space with other inmates, women who committed common crimes, drug trafficking, fraud, money laundering, but also women who simply made bad decisions in desperate moments. And those women will know her story. They'll know who she is. They'll know what she did. And many of them come from Latin America. Some are Venezuelan or have Venezuelan relatives, or know Venezuelans who suffered exactly because of decisions Cilia Flores made. Guards already report tensions. Other inmates shout insults when Cilia passes on her way to the yard. They call her thief, murderer, dictator. They tell her she deserves everything happening to her and more. Cilia keeps her head down. She doesn't respond. She can't respond, because any confrontation would result in sanctions for her too. A Venezuelan inmate serving time for a minor offense shouted at her 2 weeks ago, "My mother died because there were no medicines in the hospital. While you bought diamond necklaces, my mother died asking for morphine that didn't exist. I hope you suffer every second of the rest of your life." Guards had to intervene. They separated inmates, but psychological damage was already done. Cilia returned to her cell and cried for 6 hours straight. Another inmate shouted at her, "My sister gave birth on a hospital floor without anesthesia." She screamed in pain while nurses did what they could with nothing. Do you know where you were that day? Buying $300,000 bags in Paris. My niece was born with complications and died 3 days later because there were no functioning incubators. Your bag cost more than what it would have cost to save her life. These encounters are destroying what little remains of Cilia Flores' psyche. Each confrontation is a reminder that she can't hide from what she did. She can't pretend she was innocent. She can't blame others, because victims are there. They're alive. They're in front of her. And they have names. They have stories. They have real pain. They have faces. They have voices. And they're willing for Cilia Flores to know exactly how much suffering she caused. Meanwhile, Cilia spent decades without seeing victims. She lived in palaces protected by guards. She traveled in armored vehicles. She shopped in exclusive European stores where she never encountered common Venezuelans. She built walls between herself and reality. She never had to see the faces of children dying of hunger. She never had to hear the screams of mothers losing their children. She never had to smell the desperation of millions. Now those walls collapsed, and reality is crushing her. Dreams are another torment. Cilia reports constant nightmares. She dreams she's back in Venezuela. She dreams the crowd chases her. She dreams they beat her, that they kill her, that they drag her through streets while millions shout her name with hatred. She dreams she's in a courtroom and victims parade one by one showing scars she caused. She dreams she's in hell and every person who died because of her comes to take revenge. Other times she dreams of her previous life, with mansions, with jewels, with trips, with freedom, with power, with gala dinners, with designer dresses, with applause from people who adulated her from fear. And then she wakes up in her 6-square-meter cell, and the contrast is so brutal she screams. Guards are already used to it. They no longer run when they hear her scream from nightmares. They just document she had another difficult night. Meanwhile, millions of Venezuelans also had nightmares. They dreamed they found food. They dreamed their children were healthy. They dreamed the country recovered. They dreamed they could return to their homes. They dreamed electricity returned. They dreamed hospitals functioned. They dreamed they could buy medicines. And then they woke up in the same brutal reality. Without food, without medicines, without hope, without future. And Cilia Flores, the woman who could have turned some of those dreams into reality, was busy dreaming about her next Hermes bag purchase. The preliminary hearing on March 17th, 2026, will be the next time Cilia Flores sees Maduro. They'll be in the same courtroom, separated by meters, watched by dozens of federal agents. They won't be able to touch. They won't be able to talk. They'll only be able to look at each other. Prison psychologists predict that encounter will be devastating for both, seeing the other in prison uniform, seeing physical deterioration, seeing defeat in eyes, seeing the reality that this is permanent, that there's no escape, that there's no rescue, that there's no way to go back. Cilia Flores says she's waiting for that moment. She says she needs to see Maduro, that she needs him to tell her everything will be okay. But Maduro can't tell her that, because nothing will be okay. Never again. Maduro is as destroyed as she is, as defeated, as broken, as completely stripped of everything he once had. March 17th will begin the process that will determine if Cilia Flores spends the rest of her life in prison. Evidence is overwhelming. Testimonies are devastating. Documents are irrefutable. Recordings are incriminating. Photographs are condemning. There's no possible defense. There are only consequences. And as that day approaches, Cilia Flores crumbles a little more each day. A little more weight lost. A little more grey hair. A little more hope dead. A little more reality accepted. A little more recognition that she'll never be free again. But acceptance doesn't bring peace. It brings more pain. Because accepting means recognizing that everything coming is deserved. That every day in prison is a day of justice. That every hour of solitude is an hour of payment for years of indifference to others' suffering. That every minute of pain is a minute she should have felt when she signed documents condemning millions. Guards report changes in her behavior. Cilia is increasingly withdrawn. She talks less. She eats less. She goes to the yard less. She stays lying on her cot, staring at the ceiling for hours. Psychiatrists say she's entering a deep depression phase that could be dangerous, but she keeps rejecting treatment. She keeps refusing to take medications. She keeps insisting she's not crazy. A prison nurse described her condition. She's deteriorating rapidly, physically and mentally. She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep well. She has crying episodes that last hours. She has panic attacks several times a week. Her blood pressure is uncontrolled. She's lost so much weight, her body is consuming muscle mass. And she refuses to accept help. It's like she wants to suffer. Like she feels she deserves suffering and doesn't want to relieve it. And perhaps that nurse is right. Perhaps at some deep level of consciousness, Cilia Flores knows she deserves every second of this suffering. Perhaps she rejects treatment because she feels it would be unfair to relieve her pain when millions suffered without relief because of her. Perhaps there's a trace of conscience still alive somewhere in her destroyed mind. Or perhaps she's simply so broken she can no longer make rational decisions. Phone calls Cilia can make are monitored and recorded. 2 15-minute calls per week. To pre-approved numbers, with authorized family members. Every word recorded, every conversation documented, without privacy, without freedom to talk about certain topics. Cilia has tried calling her children. Some don't answer. Others answer but maintain cold, distant conversations full of uncomfortable silences. There's no comfort in those calls, only more pain. Her children are processing their own shame, their own guilt by association, their own fear of being judged for their parents' crimes. A particularly heartbreaking call was leaked to the press. In it, Cilia cries and tells one of her children, "I didn't deserve this. I was just the wife. I only supported him. I didn't make the real decisions. It was him. Everything was him." Her son responds coldly, "Mom, you signed documents. You gave orders. You can't pretend you were just a spectator." Cilia hangs up. She collapses. She cries for hours. Because her son is right. She wasn't a spectator. She was an active participant. She signed documents authorizing million-dollar transfers. She gave orders to judicial system officials. She met with drug traffickers. She received payments. She accumulated wealth. She protected criminals. She ordered arbitrary detentions. She silenced opponents. She wasn't innocent. She never was. And her own children know it. And they tell her. And that's killing her more than anything else. Meanwhile, Venezuelan mothers who fled the country tried calling their relatives from public phones in foreign countries, with cheap phone cards that gave 5 minutes of conversation. Crying because they missed their children. They had left with relatives because they couldn't take them on the journey, because they didn't know when they'd see them again, because everything they'd known was destroyed, because their families were separated by thousands of kilometers, because they had no money to return, because there was no way to reunite. And Cilia Flores, the woman who could have avoided that massive suffering, was busy choosing among 68 Hermes Birkin bags to decide which she'd carry to her next gala dinner. Panic attacks are increasingly frequent. According to medical reports, Cilia experiences severe anxiety episodes at least 4 times weekly. They begin with tachycardia, difficulty breathing, excessive sweating, dizziness. Then they escalate to hyperventilation, chest pain, sensation of imminent death, screams asking for help, panic convulsions where her body trembles uncontrollably. Guards arrive, they evaluate, they determine there's no real medical emergency. They tell her to breathe deeply. They give her water. Sometimes they call the nurse. The nurse takes her vital signs, confirms she's physically stable, offers her an anxiolytic if she accepts it. Cilia rejects medication. She says she's not crazy. She says she just needs to get out of there. She says this is unfair. She says she's not a criminal. And then she's alone again, trembling, crying, facing visceral terror of knowing this will never end, that she'll die in that cell, that she'll never see natural light without bars again, that she'll never feel fresh breeze without concrete walls around, that she'll never be free again, that she'll never use her jewels again, that she'll never travel again, that she'll never have power again, that everything's over. Meanwhile, millions of Venezuelans experienced exactly that type of panic attacks, provoked by hunger, by desperation, by watching their loved ones die, by having no visible future. Fathers who collapsed in streets from anxiety because they couldn't feed their children. Mothers who hyperventilated watching their babies cry from hunger without being able to do anything. Elderly who had heart attacks from stress of watching everything they built in their lives destroyed. And no one came to help them. No one gave them water. No one offered them medication. They just had to keep living with that constant terror until it became their new normal. Migraines are another constant torment. The skull contusion she suffered during capture never healed properly. Prison doctors said she'd need neurological follow-up. But neurological follow-up in prison consists of generic ibuprofen and a superficial check every 2 weeks. Cilia has headaches that last days. Pain so severe she can't open her eyes without light-provoking nausea. Pain that makes her vomit. Pain that forces her to stay lying on her cot without moving, because any movement intensifies suffering. Pain that makes her scream. Pain that makes her beg them to kill her so it ends. Guards report sometimes she screams in pain, that she begs for stronger medications, that she says she can't bear it anymore, that she hits the wall with her fists, that she pulls her hair, that she scratches her face, that she does anything to distract from pain in her head. But prison protocols are clear. Ibuprofen for mild to moderate pain. Nothing stronger without exhaustive medical evaluation. And exhaustive medical evaluations are scheduled weeks after requests. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, millions of people suffered chronic pain without treatment, without ibuprofen, without anything. Toothaches that lasted months because there were no dentists or anesthesia. Children crying from dental pain while their parents couldn't do anything. Pain from fractured bones that were never properly treated. People walking with open fractures because there was no cast or surgeons. Pain from chronic diseases progressing without control. Cancer patients dying in agony without morphine. Diabetics with ulcers that gangrened without antibiotics. People with chronic migraines going crazy because there weren't even aspirins. And Cilia Flores had access to state-of-the-art medications in her private pharmacy. Morphine, oxycodone, fentanyl, everything available, just for her. Physical deterioration is visible to anyone who sees her. Cilia Flores has aged 2 decades in 2 months. Leaked photographs from judicial hearings show an unrecognizable woman. Hair completely gray and unkempt, without dye, without cut, without style. Pale skin with age spots she previously covered with professional makeup applied by makeup artists who charged hundreds of dollars per session. deep, dark circles that look like dark holes where there were once bright eyes, wrinkles previously smoothed with $1,000 facial treatments, Botox, fillers, lasers, 15 kilos less, making her clothes hang loose over a body that's consuming itself. Hunched posture of someone who's lost all confidence, all pride, all dignity. She looks nothing like the woman who appeared in official photos with Chanel dresses and Van Cleef and Arpels jewelry. That woman no longer exists. She was destroyed by reality of consequences. She was erased by weight of suffering she caused. She was annihilated by justice that finally arrived. Venezuelan women who fled the country also aged decades in months. Stress of walking hundreds of kilometers. Trauma of leaving everything behind. Desperation of not knowing if they'd survive. Constant fear. Perpetual hunger. All visible in their faces, in their bodies, in their souls. 30-year-old women who looked 60. 15-year-old girls who looked 30. Elderly women who simply died on the road because their bodies could no longer withstand. And Cilia Flores, the woman who could have avoided that massive exodus, was busy getting facial treatments with 24-karat gold serum costing $3,000 per session. Suicidal thoughts are a constant concern of medical staff. Although Cilia Flores hasn't explicitly expressed suicidal intentions, prison psychologists have her under special surveillance. Her profile fits perfectly with high-risk inmates. Sudden loss of status, extreme social isolation, severe untreated depression, lack of hope in future, rapid physical deterioration, rejection of professional help. They place her under observation whenever they detect warning signs. When she rejects food for more than 2 days. When she refuses to go to the yard. When they find her crying uncontrollably. When she makes comments about not wanting to continue living. When she hurts herself even without apparent intention of suicide. But Cilia won't commit suicide. Not because she has hope, but because she's too cowardly. Her whole life she was cowardly. Cowardly to face consequences of her actions. Cowardly to admit her guilt. Cowardly to do the right thing when she still could. Cowardly to stop the looting. Cowardly to help the people. Cowardly to say no when she had to say no. And she's too cowardly now to take control of her own death. Meanwhile, thousands of Venezuelans did commit suicide. They couldn't bear watching their families die of hunger. Fathers who hanged themselves because they couldn't keep watching their children cry from hunger. They couldn't bear the desperation. Mothers who threw themselves from buildings because they lost their babies from lack of medicines. They couldn't bear living in a country Cilia Flores and Nicolás Maduro systematically destroyed. Young people who took their lives because they saw no future. Professionals who studied years and found no work. People who simply gave up. And Cilia will keep living. She'll keep suffering because she's too cowardly to escape. Prison companions have devastating testimonies. An inmate who was in a nearby cell for 3 weeks before being transferred shared her experience. I heard her every night. She talked to herself. She said things like, "I did nothing wrong," or "I just signed papers." She constantly justified herself. One night I heard her scream, "Why me? Why not the others?" As if she were a victim, as if she didn't understand millions of people suffered because of her. It was pathetic. I didn't feel sorry. I felt disgust. Another inmate, a Venezuelan serving time for minor fraud, managed to speak directly to Cilia once in the hallway. I told her my sister died giving birth because there was no anesthesia in the hospital. I told her while my sister screamed in pain, she was buying $5,000 shoes. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain she caused. She just looked at me with empty eyes, and then she started crying. I don't know if she cried for my sister or for herself. Probably for herself. They always cry for themselves. A third inmate shared. I shouted at her that my son died of malnutrition at 3 years old. 3 years. A baby. He died because there was no food, because everything was so expensive we couldn't buy even milk. While she accumulated 68 bags that together cost $12 million. I told her I hope she sees my son's face every time she closes her eyes, that I hope she hears him cry from hunger every night, that I hope she never finds peace. These encounters are destroying what little remains of Cilia Flores' psyche. Each confrontation is a reminder that she can't hide from what she did. She can't pretend she was innocent. She can't blame others, because victims are there. They're alive. They're in front of her. And they have names. They have stories. They have real pain. They have faces. They have voices. And they're willing for Cilia Flores to know exactly how much suffering she caused. And they have no compassion. And they have no forgiveness. And they have no mercy. Meanwhile, Cilia spent decades without seeing victims. She lived in palaces protected by armed guards 24 hours. She traveled in armored vehicles with tinted windows. She shopped in exclusive European stores where she never encountered common Venezuelans. She flew in private jets. She ate in restaurants that cost $1,000 per person. She built walls between herself and reality. Physical walls, psychological walls, emotional walls. She never had to see faces of children dying of hunger. She never had to hear screams of mothers losing their children. She never had to smell desperation of millions. She never had to feel pain she caused. Now those walls collapsed, and reality is crushing her, and there's no escape, and there's no relief, and there's no end. Cilia Flores is suffering, and she'll keep suffering. For decades, if biology permits, in that 6-square-meter cell, with her orange uniform, with her institutional shoes, with her meals on plastic trays, with her 5-minute showers, with her monitored calls, with her total isolation, with her nightmares, with her panic attacks, with her migraines, with her depression, with her progressive physical and mental deterioration, with hatred from her prison companions, with indifference from guards, with rejection from her own children, with Maduro's absence, with certainty she'll never be free again. And every second of that suffering is a reminder that justice exists. It doesn't always arrive quickly. It doesn't always arrive as we expect. But it arrives, and when it arrives for someone like Cilia Flores, it arrives with all accumulated force of millions of victims who waited years to see this moment. It arrives without compassion. It arrives without forgiveness. It arrives without mercy. It arrives and doesn't leave. It stays. Forever. 17 properties lost. $12 million in bags confiscated. 200 jewelry pieces seized. 300 pairs of designer shoes she'll never wear again. 150 designer dresses that are now evidence in a federal warehouse. All luxury, all excess, all obscene waste, all power, all control, all replaced by 6 square meters of concrete, by an orange uniform, by rubber shoes, by institutional food, by absolute solitude. And Cilia Flores has exactly the same as the millions of Venezuelans who fled the country with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Nothing, absolutely nothing, except Venezuelans who fled did so with dignity, with hope of rebuilding, with love from their families who supported them, with respect from those who know their survival story, with possibility of a better future, with certainty they did the right thing, escaping the tyranny Cilia Flores helped create. Cilia Flores fled from dignity decades ago. She has no hope of rebuilding anything. Her family slowly abandons her. Her children reject her. Her grandchildren will probably grow up without knowing her. And the whole world knows her story of greed, corruption, and cruelty. There's no future. There's no redemption. There's no second chance. There's only a cell. And time. A lot of time. This is the story of the horror Cilia Flores suffers detained. The horror she herself built with each selfish decision. With each signature on looting documents. With each bag bought with stolen money. With each indifference to millions suffering. With each repression order. With each pact with criminals. With each betrayal of her own people. Subscribe to not miss the continuation of this story. On March 17th, there's a key hearing where Cilia will see Maduro for the first time since capture. And when that happens, you'll want to know what happened in that room. Because the expression on their faces when they see each other completely defeated, when they look and see reflection of their own destruction in the other's eyes, is worth more than any judicial sentence. Because that moment will be final recognition that everything's over, that they lost, that justice won. Meanwhile, she wakes up every morning in Brooklyn, in her cell, without jewels, without bags, without designer shoes, without Maduro, without power, without control, without anything, completely alone with certainty that every day will be worse than the previous, that suffering won't end, that this is forever, and perhaps, just perhaps, that's the most perfect punishment existence could design for someone like her.